Hi, this is Tony Nash. I'm the CEO of Complete Intelligence. Thanks for joining us for another Quick Hit. This is a quick discussion we have with industry experts around different sectors and around different areas of expertise. Today, we're talking with Tate Nurkin. Tate is one of the world's top defense and security experts. He's done a lot of work with governments around the world and with militaries around the world. So first thing we'll do is we'll ask Tate to talk a little bit about himself and some of his experience.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. Great to be with you, and thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I've been in sort of the defense and security field for the past 20 to 25 years, working for the U.S. defense and intelligence communities, as well as allies and partners, predominantly looking at China and Indo-Pacific defense issues, but also sort of defense technology and what that means for the future of military capabilities and for the global defense industry.
Right. Thanks, Tate. Thanks for that. And like I said, I really appreciate you joining us today. You know, I guess one of the key things that I'm curious about with all the COVID-19 and Corona issues that have been in the news for the past couple months is the impact of COVID on militaries, you know, the readiness, that sort of thing. We're not really hearing a lot about that. Are you seeing anything there? Do you have any worries? And do you see kind of a tail on that? Is that something that will last a few months, or will we see that kind of years into the future?
Yeah, so there are definitely some short-term implications for militaries, and readiness is at the top of the list. We saw a fair amount of media coverage of the situation on the USS Theodore Roosevelt, which actually was a pretty big deal, and over 1,000 members of that 5,000 person crew were diagnosed with COVID-19. One passed away. So those sorts of incidences are happening, not just with the Theodore Roosevelt. It's happened on another U.S. Navy ship, and it's happened on a French aircraft carrier as well. Just like cruise ships, these ships are places where you're very contained and in close contact with other people who may or may not be carrying the disease, and it's easy for the disease to spread. Mm-hmm. And actually, we've also seen it incidentally with the Taiwanese Navy. Taiwan, of course, has done a fantastic job containing the crisis, but they have these friendship fleet missions that go to the South Pacific, and the most recent one went to Palau. Came back from Palau. A bunch of sailors who came off that mission were diagnosed after they had gone out into Taiwan and mingled around. So these are big issues. These ships, predominantly ships, forces deployed throughout the world, striking the balance between keeping people safe during essentially peacetime and also making sure there's operational readiness is something that not just the U.S. military has struggled with today. Okay,
great. Yeah. Do you see that, you know, are we going to be contending with this for years? Or do you think that kind of the testing and the stuff we're seeing more on the civilian side, you know, obviously that permeates into the military and is almost even more important there, but are we going to contend with this for a long time, or do you think we'll get over this in a matter of months or say a year or so?
Yeah, I mean, I would put the time frame for the readiness challenge to be slightly shorter, months to 18 months maybe. Depends on, frankly, how long, how many waves there are of outbreaks. I certainly anticipate a second wave globally, at least. So yeah, so I think that's a shorter term challenge, and one that's a little bit more manageable if you can come up with the right processes and procedures for, you know, what precautions to take. But not by the way, not just with deployed troops, also with folks working inside the Pentagon or whatever, civilians that are also supporting the defense enterprise. There are longer term challenges though, and I think some of what we've seen are militaries, you know, thinking about the new missions that they have to undertake. And again, in the short term, this is supporting COVID-19 response. In the longer term, you know, refugee monitoring, border security. These are maybe they're outside of the direct defense sector and more in the security sector. But I think there are some new missions that will be militaries will have to grapple with, and new sort of a different sense of preparedness that will have to be dealt with.
Okay, thanks. And then in terms of things to grapple with, I'm just wondering with things like social unrest. You know, we've seen a lot of economic fallout from this as people have had to sit on the sidelines for months. as industries have stopped, as things like deflation have set in, which hit wages, as say industrial manufacturing and these sorts of things really tone down. There are not just the social aspects of being isolated, but there are the economic impacts. And so what I wonder about is social unrest. So is that blown out of proportion? Like, is that something that we really don't need to worry about? Or is that something that you take seriously? And if so, where generally do you think that will and could be an issue?
Yeah, I certainly would put it, I tend to try and navigate the spectrum between alarmism and dismissiveness. And I think in this case, finding somewhere in between, but maybe on the side closer to alarmism and further away from dismissiveness. This is a big deal. I mean, there will be social and economic repercussions, and some states won't be particularly well equipped to handle those. So I think whether it's overturning of regimes or just extraordinary societal and political pressure on regimes, and I think Asia is a good place to start. Some will be more resilient than others, but yeah, I do think this is a big challenge for defense and security communities and for political establishments for sure. And I would also argue that one of the things that sort of reshoring of supply chains, including the defense supply chain, will just sort of amplify some of those pressures as well.
Amplify the pressures in, say, the manufacturing countries today, so the Asian countries, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Some of the Asian countries, and Japan, for example, is this $2.2 billion there was funds that were built into its most recent supplemental budget for reshoring of supply chains out of China. Some of those will go to Southeast Asia, some will go back to Japan. But I think the reshuffling of supply chains, and again, the defense supply chain is not immune to that at all. Something also to keep an eye on for both sort of defense readiness and for political stability issues.
Interesting. Okay, in terms of that separation of supply chains, to me, it almost sounds like it's the opposite of kind of the EU spirit, right? The EU came together with the coal and steel union, then integrated manufacturing, then other things. As they became closer, the theory was, as they became integrated, there was less likelihood of conflict in Europe. As we separate these supply chains, am I kind of exaggerating it? Is it kind of the opposite of the EU theory? And with that, is that something that you see dangerous over a 5, 10, 15, 20-year horizon? Is it near term or longer term? Where do you see that stuff happening?
Sure, it's a great question, and part of the answer is I'm not 100% sure. I've thought through it completely, but I will say, again, returning to kind of that defense supply chain as somewhat of an analog for the broader challenge. A couple of years ago, the administration commissioned a report on weakness in the U.S. defense supply chain, and one of the big findings was that the U.S. defense supply chain was over-reliant on competitors, which you could probably read to be China. Yep. Not just rare earths, but also some chemicals that go into munitions and other materials are largely sourced out of China. So I think that the answer here is to reshore some critical supply chains. We've learned that with the medical supplies most recently. But I would argue that maybe part of the solution is to find your trusted partners and also to stick with them. And some of that can be regional. I know that that's an area that your firm looks at a lot is regionalization of supply chains. But I would say, one of the challenges coming out of COVID-19 is a geopolitical one, and it's meeting the challenge of China on a lot of levels. And I think for the U.S. to just sort of retreat back into kind of a tendency toward autarky might not be the right answer. Find the things that we absolutely have to have, find the partners that we can trust, and try and engage them so that you have some partners to deal with this much broader challenge. Yep.
Absolutely. Wise words, Tate. And so, again, thanks so much for your time. We could talk for hours. And so I really appreciate your time today. And as this goes on, I hope we can come back to you in a few months for maybe an update or something and another conversation. So with that, really appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for watching.
Thanks, Tony.